All right, so let's get started. This is what my starter looks like before I feed it. Right here, I am getting rid of a good amount and throwing it away. This is a digital scale I got off of Amazon to help me keep track of when I feed my starter. So right now I'm just zeroing out the measurements in ounces, and I am going to put 4 ounces of flour and 4 ounces of water. The amount doesn't matter. What matters is the ratio. If you're going to do 5 ounces of flour, you want to do 5 ounces of water, 6 ounces, 6 ounces. Here you combine and stir until it looks like this, a little bit like pancake batter.
Shred this?
Shred what? Personally, I like to use a dry erase marker just to show where my starter is beginning. You can also use a rubber band, and make sure you put a lid, but you don't shut the lid. It's just supposed to loosely be on top. And this is after 6 hours of sitting on my counter. So now it's ready to use. Here I am just going to pour about 50 grams. Because it's so thick right now, I accidentally poured too much, so I did have to scrape off some of the excess. And then you add 350 grams of water, so you can mix those two together first. You can use a fork or a whisk, basically until it looks like milk. Then you add 500 grams of bread flour and mix that all together as well. Make sure to get the sides. Eventually you'll have to use your hands just to make sure you get as much as possible off the sides. It will be sticky, and that is fine. It should look something like this, and you just cover it with a damp towel or damp piece of paper towel. After leaving it alone for 30 minutes to an hour, you can start adding your salt and anything else you want to add to your sourdough. I'm using sea salt truffle and dark chocolate since I will be doing a cinnamon sugar loaf. I'm wetting my hands because when you are stretching and folding, it will be sticky, but water does help. This is my first round of stretch and fold. You want to do this 4 times, 30 minutes in between each time for a total of 2 hours. This is my second round of stretch and fold. You can see it's already expanded just a little bit from letting it sit for an additional 30 minutes. Here is my third round. And here is my last round, which I just picked it up from the sides to let it fall into place, because at this point I want it to look much more round and have a better shape before I let it sit overnight. Now I'm going to cover it again with my damp paper towel and let it sit in my oven between 8 to 10 hours so it can bulk ferment. What you want is for it to double in size, but not too much. Here is the morning of. Look at those bubbles. Now we get to shape it. Now I'm just flouring the countertop and then softly remove it from the bowl. I'm trying not to be aggressive because I do want to keep some of the air that's naturally occurred here. You will eventually end up popping most of the air bubbles, but just make sure you don't overdo it because you do want that to puff up when you put it in the oven. Since I am making a cinnamon sugar sourdough, I am actually making this into as much of a rectangle I can. Again, I'm trying not to press down because I do want to keep the air that's formed in this dough already. And here I just start off with cinnamon and then add in the brown sugar. The brown sugar you do want to focus on putting it in the middle and not putting it on the edges. In a little bit, you will see that this does create a syrup. For whatever reason, the dough does create an effect where the sugar starts to melt and makes the dough unmanageable, which I learned the hard way. So here I fold it in and I add another layer of cinnamon and brown sugar. Again, trying not to go too into the edges. And then again, I fold it over and add some more cinnamon and brown sugar. This is where it got a little hard. You do want to fold it in lightly, again, not kneading it too harshly because you want to keep the bubbles. But as you can see, the sugar started to stick to my hands and started to pull up the dough. Here I am supposed to fold it again and roll it from the other side, but this is when the dough starts to come apart, and that does not happen the way I wanted it to. To the point I second guessed myself when I was ready to put it into the bowl. I said, no, let me try to save it. I ended up ripping it more, but accidents happen. This is what it looked like once I put it in. The important part is that the seams are facing up, and that is what you want to continue to close before you put this in the fridge. Once we put it in the fridge, we do want to wait at least 5 hours. You can put it in the fridge for even a few days if this is not something that you want to bake the same day. For me, I actually just waited the minimum 5 hours. So 5 hours later, I was ready to take it out. You could tell that it had already doubled as well in the fridge. And because the sugar had been coming out in a syrupy paste, I struggled here. This is where it did get stuck, and I had to slowly try to not rip it off, but just peel it off as lightly as possible. I did end up ripping a little bit of the dough here, and thankfully I could still tell that the air bubbles were intact. Now the fun part has arrived. You've done all the hard work. Now you're just flouring the top so it can be easier to shape and score the bread. Or in layman's terms, just cut it in the design that you wish. I was trying to keep it simple and cut it straight down the middle with a few zigzag cuts on the right. While you're doing all that, you would have wanted to preheat your oven to 450 degrees and left the Dutch oven in there for an hour. This is so the whole pot is hot while your cold dough just slips in the middle. Immediately, once you've put in the dough, you do want to cover it again. This helps achieve the main rise once you put it in the oven, which will be for 30 minutes. Here I took the lid off and I'm putting it back in for 10 to 15, and this is the final product after 10 to 15 minutes. It does have to be at a lower temperature. I will include the link to the recipe that I did use for regular sourdough. The only difference is that I added chocolate, sugar, cinnamon to this loaf, but the steps are all the same. Right now, I am just trying very hard not to burn my hands, just so I can get it onto this wire rack so it can cool. You immediately do want to take it out of the Dutch oven after you have finished your baking. And unfortunately, there is more waiting. You will not be cutting into this for at least an hour, if not 2 hours, just because if you cut into it too soon, it will look gummy. And it is technically still baking on the inside. So leave it alone. Do something else in the meantime. This is what it looks like on the outside. Now the moment has come. I'm just gonna Give it a little squeeze. There are little cracks in there. Now to see what's on the inside, I wanted to achieve a cinnamon swirl. So let's see if I got that swirl. And I did, with a bit of chocolate. I also got a little bit of that bounce, and I'm satisfied.